today actually a Moadim Lesimcha, that which means in Hebrew means festivals for happiness. That we should, for joy, we should enjoy the holiday, because the holiday really does continue throughout the week. And yeah, Dina and I just went out for a couple of hours, and we saw lots of families just going out to picnic and to do all kinds of stuff. It is joyous.
I don't know if anybody's seen this Passover table from the other day yet. Can you give me share screen? Oh, I've got it. And I don't have 4 questions, but I got 2 questions, okay? Who's hosting this Passover Seder? Okay, is question number 1, and I think you're gonna like question number 2.
I saw that picture. That's Camilla Harris, right?
Yes, it is. Oh, you've seen the picture already?
Yeah.
I didn't know how long it would take before it got on the news, but I wonder,
this morning at 7 a.m. it was already in the news.
Is that right?
You're talking about the wine, right?
Yeah.
Oh, did it hit the news? Oh,
yeah. 7 a.m. in Israel, it was on the main news line.
Wow. So I mean, I got it probably closer to about 6 a.m. We were in the middle of what's called the prayer watch, praying, and Tommy was with me, and he was sent to him by some rabbi in America, and but this bottle of wine here is Sagot wine, and that comes from the Judean hills, just north of Jerusalem, and today they're doing almost 2 million bottles a day, and it's just against U.S. policy, you know, because basically she's got wine, okay, from an occupied territory in accordance to that Obama did just before he left office. And here it is on her Passover. Thank God that could happen.
Amen.
Amen. Anyway, that was the second question. What on this table seems a little bit unique, and but Jonathan, you were all over it right away. Way to go.
Sorry.
So did anybody else bring some pictures that they want to show, or videos?
Well, we don't take pictures.
I know.
We don't take pictures, but I don't know, you know, if you can imagine, we also had a bottle of Sagot wine, right? We had that. In fact, I decided to end the last 2 cups of wine with Sagot wine, which we always enjoyed. I think, Dean, you were the one who introduced me to Sagot wine. And we actually had a guest today who worked with Yaakov Berg and Sagot in their winery. So yeah, Sagot is really up there. It's they're doing well, thank God. Yeah. But if you can imagine, we had several grandchildren, kind of ages from age 1.5 to 9. And they were all up, well, not the 1.5, the 1.5, I think he fell asleep at a certain stage, but the others who were older, they were running until after midnight, not just asking the 4 questions, of course, but they were very, very involved in the storytelling. And in fact, they even put up a play telling the story and kind of reenacting it, so that and those of you who know Daniel, my son Daniel, he was with us too. So Daniel, he was translating everything that the kids were saying for my mother-in-law, who doesn't know Hebrew that well. So we just had a wonderful time of storytelling, not to speak, of course, of the great food that Dina prepared, but it was just a lovely Seder. And that's really, I think, the main, the center of the Seder night is the children. It's really making sure that the story passes on. And then what a really interesting thing that happened was that one of my sons, who lives also in our community, he came by dressed like an Elijah. There's a certain part in the Seder where Elijah's. We pray that he will drop by and of course let us know that
Are you declaring Elijah showed up yet this year?
So we actually had two Elijahs who showed up. The first one showed up too early, so he said, "Okay, to prepare the wine, I'll come by later." And then somebody else showed up. But he did a really interesting experiment. He said he had in their Seder, he made up a story, and then he had each one next to each other, right, to whisper the story in the ear of the other. And they had to try to keep the story the same as what they heard. And so in this experiment, you saw how when they passed it from one to the next, and they compared, the last person who received the story had to repeat the story in front of everyone. And you saw the huge gaping difference between the story when it started out and the way it ended when it was done just in one person passing it on to another. But by telling the story together at the Seder, with everybody sharing the story together, that's really the only effective way of preserving the story with all of its details. And I thought it was a really creative way of bringing the message home as to why it's so important to do the Seder the way it was created by our ancestors, and how involving the children in it from the from a very young age, which I think is really a major part of the challenge. But I think the format really works.
Can everybody see?
Got it.
Dean, can you guess what this picture is?
Is that a whole bunch of chametz?
Nope.
No.
So in my house, and I'm assuming also in Yair's house and in most Orthodox people's house, you will have some kind of hidden closet with all the extra special kosher for Passover dishes.
Ah.
And it's all kind of stuck up in there in very tight space. So every year when I take it out, I have to take a picture of how it was organized before, so I will know how to put it back in, the week after. So it's all kind of it's an engineering game.
Wow, I see. Thank you. Listen, I'd love you to send me that picture because I could use it. Wow.
That's like a puzzle every year, right?
Yeah. And the problem is every year you buy a couple of new things, and then you have, but the closet stays the same size, and you have to have to make it work somehow.
Well, tell us about your Seder.
So we were at my parents' house. After many years, we weren't there. Because of COVID, and we lived in the States for a few years, so everything. So we weren't there for a long time. We were at my parents' house. We had my parents and myself with my kids, and we had two of my siblings with their families, and we had my grandma who's a 94-year-old Holocaust survivor. So we were all kind of having a long party until 2 a.m. And honestly, the kids all fell asleep somewhere in the middle.
Well, you went on to 2 a.m. So
and that was after my father did a lot of compromising because of the kids. When the kids are not there, that goes later.
I'm interested to know in Exodus 12:42. It says, because the Lord kept vigil, I'm reading out of the English, I'm not sure what it says in your Hebrew. Because the Lord kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt, on this night, all the Israelites are to keep vigil to honor the Lord for generations to come. I was, being at we were about 5.5 hours away with Tommy from Hayaval, and about 300 people that had come from all over Missouri to be a part of this Passover Seder. And it was beautiful. And the way he incorporated the children in, it was probably one of the nicest ones I've ever been, in a Christian setting. But anyways, what they did is after the Seder was over, and it didn't go to 2 in the morning. It went to 10 o'clock. Okay. But it started at 5. And there was lots of music. They had a vigil that went till 6 o'clock in the morning, and everybody came to pray for Israel from 10 o'clock to 6 a.m. And this was the scripture that they did it off, is that they would remember, because the Lord kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt. On that night, all the Israelites kept vigil to honor the Lord for generations to come. And so that was basically the verse that, and I had never seen it before. And so I don't know to ask this question, because for some reason it just didn't jump on even though I had it underlined, I don't ever remember talking about this with you yet here. So my question is there any part of the Israeli movement amongst maybe some Jewish sects that actually keep vigil, as in relationship to this verse?
Well, that's a very interesting question. In the Haggadah itself, it actually talks about several rabbis who met together, especially in Bnei Brak. All right, Bnei Brak is, of course, a familiar name, I think, to all of you, and they were talking about all kinds of things. We'll go into that, touch upon that a bit in detail in a moment. But until the students came by early in the morning and they said, the time has come for the morning prayer. So in other words, yes, there were many who kept this vigil all the way until the morning. And but I must admit that I think most human beings, after 4 cups of wine, find it very difficult to stay up until the morning. But the interesting thing about this story is that there are commentaries that say that they were busy figuring out how to do their exodus, and this was during the time of Bar Kokhba and the rebellion, and they were trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to free ourselves? At that time, it was from Roman rule. So I think it's very, very interesting that the story is not just about the past, it's also about the present. It's about, it's like we mentioned earlier with the kids, kind of acting it out. It's not just for them to act out what it was like, but it's also for everyone to discuss what kind of exodus are we doing today? In what way are we freeing ourselves, or is God helping us free ourselves from Mitzrayim? Mitzrayim, Egypt in Hebrew means a narrow place, into a broader place. In which way are we truly ascending spiritually to a better place where we have so much more that we can do in this world to make it a better place? And so whether it's helping Jews from Ukraine and from Russia nowadays to make Aliyah, we have on the last day of Passover this week, there's a panel of 3 members of our community who came back from Ukraine, who were there helping not just actually the Jewish holding, but also helping the regular Ukrainians. They were part of the field hospital that's there, helping the local population deal with the terrible things that they're going through. So we have a lot of stories of Exodus and of redemption going on today. And every generation had their own current Exodus. So that's also a major aspect of the Seder.
Yair,
Ken,
can I share a story from our Seder?
of course, wonderful.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
My wife's grandfather was a soldier, and he wrote a letter to his family in 1914, 108 years ago.
Wow.
In the First World War. It wasn't the first, it was the big war. Nobody knew that there would come a second World War. It was the big war. And he wrote a letter home, and it is kept in the family. He was a Jewish soldier in the German army.
Wow.
Of the First World War. And he writes home how he found himself with 4 more Jewish soldiers, and they were in the lines. There wasn't real fighting going on those days, but they got packages from home with the things they needed for the Seder, the matzah and the wine and so on. And they had to find a place to do the Seder. So they found themselves in a ruined building in the cellar. They found a place where they can sit and light candles. And they made their Seder over there. And what he wrote his family is that he was thinking about the way he would be freed, hopefully, with the help of God, from this war, and find himself back home. And he was injured and went back home. His brother died in the war. And when he was married and had a child, he called his child, which is my wife's father, he called him on the name of the brother that was killed in the First World War. So, and many years later, about 20 years ago, they brought his remains from Germany to Israel, and he is buried next to his brother.
Wow.
So that was a family story about the redemption, if you can call it.
Right. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. It's always been a huge challenge getting matzahs, for example. But even today, how do we get all the matzahs that are necessary for Jews in Ukraine, as an example? There are many stories of rabbis there, all kinds of amazing ways that they find in order to make sure that every Jew can celebrate the Seder with all of its trimmings. There's even this thing called Kimcha de Pascha, which is just prior to Passover. People are called upon to donate so that they can make sure that everybody that is perhaps not able to afford matzahs should have it. So it's like a real collective effort to make sure that everybody has what they need to do a proper Seder. I don't know, has any of you ever been to places like there are these huge Seders with hundreds of people in places like Tibet. I hear that there's in South America. There are all kinds of places where a lot of Israelis and a lot of Jews seem to like to travel. And there are amazing people who go out to the wilderness and they pitch a tent and they get all the matzahs and everything that's necessary. And all the Jewish travelers in those areas actually come together and they have the Seder with hundreds of people.
Usually by Chabad.
Right. But now there is actually many beyond Chabad. It's like really become kind of a big happening. Especially in many cases, we're dealing with Israelis who aren't necessarily, let's say, religious, who would otherwise be. They wouldn't really have a Seder if it wasn't for these kinds of organized Seders. By the way, you know what percentage of Israelis had a Seder this year?
94%.
96%. Yeah.
96%. I knew it was high.
Amazing. Yeah. So I don't know how you feel, Moshe and Yonatan, but I must admit that I really sense a constant rise in how the country here embraces the holidays. It's becoming more and more, just like the natural thing that people do, and it wasn't always that way.
45 years ago, I was in the Army, in the Air Force. My squadron commander suddenly found himself with a religious guy in his squadron, something that wasn't usual in those days. Now there are many. And he asked me about a month before Pesach, can I help him organize a fake Seder so the other pilots could learn what the meaning of the Seder is and what the content is, and to play the Seder a week or two before. And I said, yes, I'll be happy to organize it. And I called a friend, and he called Rabbi Druckmann, which is a known rabbi in Israel. And he said he'd be happy to come. The night that it was supposed to happen, it became very tense in the Syrian border. Almost war broke open, but we had to cancel. But 2 weeks after Pesach, we did a play of the Seder because we committed ourselves, so it was done, and the non-religious pilots were very happy to learn about the way things are done and what the meaning of things is. It was a very special experience of doing a Seder not on Passover night.
Well, then you understand, Moshe, you're describing some of the same experiences I think we have with Christians who are having it, coming into a revelation of, first of all, that there's a connection between us and you and purposes and plans that God has between Jews and Gentiles and nations with Israel. And actually, we had that experience the other night hearing Deb. Is Deb there, Sylvia?
She is.
I'd love to get some of her first impressions, and maybe you'd all like to hear it too, of what it's done for her as a Christian. Deb, go ahead, please share.
I really had no idea what Passover was all about. Although I grew up in a Christian home, it was just something we didn't talk about and nothing that we celebrated. And but it just really, I don't really know how to explain how it changed me, but it did. It changed me in a way that I understand so much more when I read the Bible about Passover. And Exodus just kind of came alive to me in everything that happened. And I was just amazed at how the blessings and just the way everything worked. It's hard for me to put it in where I'm not a real good speaker, so but it's just it's exciting to me now. I'm looking forward to next year. I want to learn more about it, and I know I was for the group. originally we were going to try to do a Seder meal, and it was my responsibility to put it together. And I was sharing with Pastor Sylvia afterwards. I'm like, oh, this is nothing what I had in mind. So I'm used to just, sitting down to a meal, eating, that type of thing. But to see the way everything was laid out and how everything, led into something else, and how important it is, and everything had meaning to it. It wasn't, there was nothing that was just happenstance or, oh, let's just do it this way, it was all very deeply steeped in the Word of God, and how it was laid out and why He's done the things that He's done. And it just really opened my heart up so much more to the Jewish faith and to understand the roots of it.
Terrific.
I'm not, my direction is off in Uganda. Sylvia, you went out to that region once upon a time near Jinja, where there is Jewish people in Uganda. Are you there, Sylvia?
I'm here, yes. What I would add to that is, because I didn't participate with them when I was there, but I will add this, and what was really mind-blowing or mind-boggling to me was coming from America in a Christian home and then going to Africa, and to see how the Africans were so intertwined and they had a deep appreciation and an understanding and a love for Israel and the Jews. I never experienced that before. I'm going to say from my ethnicity and my culture in America, it just wasn't so. But when I went there, everything was, in relationship about Israel and the Jews. And it was so profound because God began to reveal or give me an understanding when I was stationed in Brooklyn, New York. And I actually thought I was going to move into the community there, and then I ended up getting sent to Africa. And I was like, what does Africa have to do with Israel and the Jews? I'm not sure. And then when I got there and I saw there was such a profound love and a depths of understanding and a desire to know more for Israel and the Jews. So I walked away with a greater appreciation. So I can share that.
Thank you. I just must, I don't know if you can see this. Sorry. Over, I have
Put it
two
right
books
in front of your face. Okay, that's good.
Thank you.
We got
That's
it.
perfect. Overcoming Africa's 10 Plagues. And another book here that says Uganda, Africa, and Israel. These are two books that I received from, some of you know him. He also joins us when he can. David Sispoya. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly how to position it. But he was with us on Shavuot, as with Sylvia and Dean and Ruth. We're actually talking about 3 years ago. And he was telling us about how many Africans today identify themselves as being very much part of the story of Exodus. That the ancient Egypt was essentially extended way into Africa, and that they as Africans now realize that the 10 plagues still exist, still that Africa can only really overcome the 10 plagues that persist by finally accepting the God of Israel, which Pharaoh refused to accept way back then, and that they need to connect properly with the God of Israel and with the Jewish people in order to redeem themselves of the 10 plagues. That was like so mind-boggling to me. He gave us a very detailed explanation regarding the 10 plagues. And of course, the 10 plagues are very much part of the Seder evening, we actually go through the 10 plagues. And one of the things that I'm not sure everybody is aware of is that with every single plague, we actually take part of the wine out of the cup because we want to demonstrate that the plagues for us diminish our joy. We do not take joy from the suffering of the Egyptians. And we do so, we demonstrate this by taking out part of the wine. And it's very welcoming to see now those who are now awakening to the God of Israel and beginning to believe in the God of Israel and then becoming partners in the redemption process of the entire world. That was just mind-boggling for you. I can't imagine what it must have been for you, Sylvia, when you went to Africa.
It absolutely was. I mean, again, because even the mindset, you know, when the Africans begin to share, because again, being born in the United States, I always had the mindset of the Egyptians looking like the Egyptians of today, the Middle Eastern, and then going to Africa and be re-educated and understanding that Egypt was Africa and how they looked in Kenya, how they looked in Uganda is more of what they would have looked like then, was really re-educating me, my mind, and brought me to that place, as our friend Pastor Shane always says, you don't know what you don't know until you realize you don't know. And so I discovered all the things that I did not know, and really connecting the dot of Africa, my heritage, with Israel and the Jews, and even bringing some understanding in relationship to my own nation and slavery, you know, and them giving that understanding of, you know, Africans not treating the Jews as best as they could. And so it ended up with the 10 plagues still being there, even them fellow countrymen having to go out and all of that, and even them looking forward to 2020 when it was actually the 400th year of slavery. The first slaves came into America in Virginia, and God's promise of redemption unto them as well in receiving the God of Israel. So wow. It's pretty profound in everything. I mean, all of everything for me.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, Sylvia, because Eve, you know, piped in as well that about just this growing movement. She sees it really clearly in Uganda that many local churches they do the best they can with what they have to be able to help bring an understanding of where Passover came from, and connecting that with the Last Supper, and you know, and some of which have moved to a community. It's near the Kenya border. Is that's East Uganda? What is it, Sylvia? It is.
It is. All of that is East Africa.
Okay, no, but I mean, it's east of Uganda, where you've got all these Jewish people that for over 100 years are really converts, and they're wearing kippahs, etc. And the long and the short is they've been trying to make Aliyah for years. But just amongst the Christians that haven't necessarily converted, there is a huge movement all over East Africa, especially. But even in, you know, if I can say, there's a little bit of tension between the Coptic church in Egypt with the Africans that are in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, etc. And why? It's precisely with what Sylvia's just shared. Because you see, they're going, we have paid a price and we were scattered. The Arabs came in, took over North Africa. We were moved down south, but we were really the Egyptians that actually had cursed Israel, that enslaved them for 100 years. And we've paid a deep price. Some of us are living in America now. And the reality is, so they're trying to return back to their roots. And so you're seeing the significance of a Passover Seder, all the feasts of the Lord, even as Eve just shared, happening throughout Africa. And I've experienced it many times myself. There's this deep love, longing to learn and understand, so that what's here, I'm pointing to my heart. I'm sorry, I'm not on camera because I know my bandwidth is weak, but it could be moved from the heart, that I'm pointing to my brain, to the mind. But this past week too, in Egypt, in I think it's called Luxor, 400 Christians came from many other nations there and connected with the Coptic church there. And they did a Seder there. And it was apparently, I'm waiting to see some pictures or some video, but apparently I heard it was just really something special. But so there's a movement in Africa to connect with Israel. And Sylvia is a testimony of getting thrown off her horse and spent 8 years in the midst of it.
Wow.
My daughter-in-law and my daughter had prepared a dinner on Friday night, Passover. And we ended up leading a Passover for them and 6 of our grandkids who bounced all over the place, but I think they got it. And then we watched the Prince of Egypt from DreamWorks. And we got the story across, and we got the Exodus, the commitment to God and to leave the place where you weren't able to worship God. So I think we were meant to be here.
Wow, so thank you very, very much. In fact, here, take a look at this picture here. Just to show you, this is a 3rd generation of Christian Zionists. And this is Tommy's grandchildren. And do you see the picture above them? These kids, many of them know Hebrew, sing a lot of the same Hebrew songs you sing. And it's really, really amazing. And you can see the little one, we got a Bible in his hand. He's going to be a little preacher. But we saw them before we went off. And of course, they're playing instruments at young age and dancing and singing Hebrew songs.
And it's very interesting that it says, Az Yashir Moshe. Then Moshe sang. And Az typically indicates something in the future. And our sages, the commentaries actually say that in the future, in the final redemption, we will start singing before the redemption happens, not afterwards. That's the real test of belief, right? So much of the song was about believing. Miracles can happen if you believe. So here, here we see, I think that's the beauty of that event that we saw, that we see Jews and Christians together, especially when you're talking about Africans who are so connected to the story. And I'm glad to see David Sispoya join us. Wow, such an honor, David. Thanks so much for joining us. He was the first one to introduce me to this the amazing things that are happening in Africa. And to see everybody singing in anticipation for the final redemption is a fulfillment of what the rabbi said way back then. It's like, especially when we're singing all together. That's very beautiful. That's something that we will be singing on Friday, this coming Friday, which is the last day of Passover. And it is the anniversary of the splitting of the sea. And it's a big singing happening in the synagogue, yes.
3,444 years ago.
Good evening, friends. Sorry, I just came in. I was escorting my mother-in-law came around. We had dinner with her. But on Passover day, I actually was teaching a group of people for the from the 10th day of Nisan, 10th day of Abib. I was producing daily devotionals for our group. It's a big group of about 600-700 people, teaching them about the relationship between the Passover and what they call Easter. So I was unraveling it day by day, and the climax will be tomorrow. So on the Passover day, we had an overnight prayer. So I had a couple of sessions, one of which I was asked to speak about what was the topic? It was called something to do with Israel's redemption. And so I went deep into the journey of Israel's redemption. I told them it was not an overnight thing. It began from the time when God called Moshe and asked him that he told him he's going to use him as the deliverer of Egypt, or of Israel, of the Israelites from Egypt. And this happened over 9 months, according to my research. I think the 10 plagues happened over 9 months. So the night of the Passover was only but the climax. So anyway, that was the essence of what I taught that evening. Yeah.
Wonderful. And David also was a witness to one of our miracles, because he was talking about the 10 plagues. And when he got to the plague of the frogs, we saw all of a sudden a frog hopping around into our house, which had never, ever happened before. But it was just, we were all very excited to see how amazing things can happen just to wake us up. What was it, like 2 or 3 in the morning on Shavuot? And yeah, 3 o'clock in the morning, you gave that amazing teaching about the 10 plagues that we all really enjoyed.
Connect, just as Ruth was sharing, as David was sharing, we try to find out, hey, what have we missed out in something called Easter, something called communion, something that we know came out of something that was a Passover Seder. And of course, I went to the resurrection part, and I opened up Ezekiel 37. I says, how can we believe all the other prophecies that we apply to Christianity as literally fulfilled, and then be living in a time where even right now I'm talking to the fulfillment of prophecies of people who have made Aliyah, who have settled the land, who are living in the land, where there's countless prophecies that speak about this happening. How can I not believe all the other future prophecies that also have a literal fulfillment as well, including Ezekiel 37? And I took him to verse 11 and 12. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. And I just really wanted them to just see there are scriptures in the prophetic word for nations and Gentiles. But let's read this for what it is literally. For the whole house of Israel, they say, our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. We are cut off. There was a time where hope was gone. And then it says in verse 12, therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, O my people, I'm going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Yair, I don't want to disappoint you, and I hope you aren't offended by what I believe. But I want to say this, is that you and some of your brethren that are with us here today, and many more in Israel, you're just the tip of the iceberg. I really believe in the fullness of God's plans and purposes. As Ezekiel 39 says, not one will be left behind. And even as we saw a desecration of Joseph's tomb last week, and its restoration all in a matter of days. I believe that a day is coming of the resurrection of the dead, that every bone, every ash that is anywhere on this planet is going to be back in Israel. And God has said it, he speaks it, and I can't look at this as an allegory anymore. And I can't, you have to know Christians, and I've seen this for years, they teach Ezekiel 37 as if this is an awakening to the church, when I really believe that the resurrection of the dead is so, we look at it as Christians, we celebrate this day, this morning, as the resurrection of Yeshua, which I believe is just a first fruit. But yet the fullness is pointing to a resurrection of the dead, that we as Christians, together with you, we can pray for the resurrection of the dead. We can pray for the fullness of really Abba's word to come to pass and be fulfilled, so that his name would be hallowed and glorified, not just in Israel, not just in Jerusalem, but in all nations, that we would know the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because of the three words that he gave Abraham in his covenant in Bereshit 12:3, one is all the families of the earth will be blessed. And so our hope is absolutely connected to the resurrection of the dead, which is absolutely connected to all Jews coming back home to Israel. And I think it's a hope we all share.
For sure. Amen. Beautiful.
So on the right is our daughter-in-law, Paula.
Ah.
On the left is Matthew's business partner, and his name is Eric Edelman. He's the son of a prominent Jewish family in Toronto. And we sat in a row, Rick and I, with Eric's mom and his son, and our son and his 8-year-old daughter. So it was an incredible experience to have a Jew and a Christian presenting this music in a little tiny United Church in Scarborough. So here is the song. It's from 1 Corinthians 15. And let's call it "The Shofar Shall Sound" for the purposes of
We shall not all see, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. At the last trumpet,
Bravo. Wow. She's really talented. Your
Yes.
daughter-in-law. Very nice. I'd like to perhaps just part with a one final thought, unless somebody else would like to add on as well. Last night we started counting the Omer, right? It's today was the first day of the Omer. We're now counting up to the Shavuot, to the receiving of the Torah, celebrating the revelation at Sinai. And you'll notice that these coming weeks are full of very significant days in modern times, whether it's going to be remembering the Holocaust, remembering those who died in defense of our country, Independence Day, Jerusalem Day. These are all very modern events, modern holidays that have been added to our calendar, and they're all in this counting of the Omer period. So connecting with what you said earlier, Dean, about how it's happening. We see this is so much part of our lives today, all of these special days, and they're all very new, and they're all they show us how the ancient and the modern actually come together. They become inseparable in our calendar, and it'll be very, very special. These coming meetings will certainly be touching upon these very significant times that we live in.
Wow. Thank you. I just to add to that, again, just from a Christian perspective, we've connected with Passover. I mean, there's a movement around the world connecting with Passover amongst Christians. That movement has continued to Sukkot, Feast of Tabernacles. We're seeing now a movement that's touching on Shabbat. But I really believe this movement of right now counting the Omer, entering into the fullness of these Feast of Weeks is absolutely, I think, critical for the church, and I think critical for you in Israel, because if the church can really understand this counting of Omer, again, just to give you an example, just simplicity from a Christian point of view, this is Resurrection Sunday, so that would mean for the next 40 of the 50 days, in our Christian tradition, and even with what our New Testament shares, this is the time when Jesus was resurrected from the dead and talked to his disciples about the kingdom of God. This is when he taught about the restoration of a kingdom of Israel to Israel. Now, they all wanted it back 2,000 years ago. They thought he was going to use swords and everything else. So from a Christian perspective, if we can connect that these next, as we count the Omer, and as you said, it's leading really to the Torah given at Sinai. I mean, if we as Christians got to get to that, we have to receive the Torah. We have to receive it so that we can understand it, so we can find the critical instructions that actually include us in it. And that leads to having our eyes and our ears open for us as Christians to come out of our blindness. And so if you're praying as Jewish people for us, and I know you do, because is it Psalm 67 that in many Jewish circles you pray just almost every day? Is that the one that looks like a menorah? Do you know which one I'm talking about, Yair? Yeah. Where you're praying for us and you're praying for our salvation. We want to just encourage you to do that, because I sense, and even since coming here to Kansas City and with the work we're going to do here, I really believe it's about a movement that's going to go way beyond we could imagine, of nations connecting with what God is doing with Israel and with the Jewish people, and what we need to do together really to give him greater glory and honor and praise. So this counting the Omer, I'm going to probably take more seriously myself personally than I ever have over these next 7 weeks. So, Hag Sameach, everyone.
Hag Sameach.